All right, so we saw in the last video that you can have a function perform a repetitive piece of code, right? And also that you could actually pass, update a variable in one place and have it be read by the function in a different place, right? By using global variables. Now, it is important to know that there are other ways in which we can do things. So, for example, we can pass parameters, and this will be clear why this is important in a second. So we can say, something like this. Instead of having space be global, I can take it out of here, and I declare int SPC over here, right? Now, what I can do here is this, is I can pass it to space. I'll say SPC. So what if I could tell it, space here 3 and space here 2 or something like that, right? If I could tell it how many spaces I want in between, that would be great. But then this function space has to change. What we're going to do is we're going to create what's called a parameter in space, and we're going to allow just for people to say space, open parentheses, and then a number that will indicate the number of spaces. The way we declare this function, or the signature of this function, which is this piece that I'm highlighting here, the way this changes is because I put here int, I don't know, r for the number of spaces, okay? So what this says is that people are going to call this function called space, and within parentheses they're going to put an integer. And that integer in this code will be known as r. Now if r is the number of spaces, then I have to update this to r, right? So int I equals 0 to r. Look what happens if I try to compile. I get a lot of space int and function cannot be applied, blah, blah, blah. What it's telling me is that space now needs a number in here, because the signature has space, and then in parentheses there must be a number. It's not optional. So let's give it a space. So the first one is going to be 2 and the second one is going to be 1. I'm going to comment this code for now, the code that asks the user for the number of spaces. I'm going to comment it for now, and I'm going to run this. So you see the first one, the space between the first and the second array is larger, it's 2, right? And the space between this one and this one is just 1 or no spaces, right? Because I'm going from 0 to I less than r, that means that a 1 is actually 0 space and a 2 is actually 1 space in between the arrays. That's for you to figure out why. But that's off the point. The point now is that I can give it any value that I want. So if I ask the user for the number of spaces, I can just pass it here. And why can't I put the variable SPC in here, the new variable that I've created to get the input from the user? I can, because SPC is an int, and space, the signature of space, must receive an int, either the number itself, like 3, 4, the literal, or just a variable that contains an int. We can compile this and run it as well. I'll put 2 spaces now, and that gives me even separation between the arrays. Now the thing with parameters is that it's very powerful because you can add more parameters. So space doesn't need to have just one integer. I can, for example, give it an integer and also give it a string s, okay? That means that space is going to receive an integer r and a string s. And the string s, I'm going to use it to be printed here, okay? Print line s. Remember, string s having a signature that says space int r string s means that every time I call space, I have to provide a string, an integer, and then a string. And the string can be this, for example. Okay? And that, right? So here, for example, I'm providing an integer and a string. That is because the function says that space requires an integer and a string. And what is going to happen is I'm going to print this string one less times than r. Okay, and r is here, s is here. What this signature says is that space receives an integer r and a string s. And within these curly braces, the integer that's passed is going to be known as r, and the string that's passed is going to be known as s. Okay, so let's compile this and run. And it asks me the number of spaces, 2, and then it prints, you know, it prints this twice and this twice. Okay, now I can always do the enter. Obviously, there's a problem here, right? There's an enter there, and that's why I was getting just one space when I said 2 and 0 spaces when I said 1, because the first print line just happens next to the last print. So what I can do is just add a new line here, and everything will be as you would expect. So 2 spaces, and there it is. It prints this and this, and this and this, right? This separation is due to the fact that I have a new line here. If I want to make this code better, and this is really important. Look how I'm fixing this thing. System.out.println. I'm just fixing this code here, and all the spaces fix themselves. I don't have to create this little routine for every time I want to use it. Right? This now prints the 2 strings consecutively, right, between the arrays. So whatever changes I do here, every time I call space, I don't have to change anything over here, right? So now I can have 2 parameters. I can create much more complex functions. So for example, I want a function that adds a number to each of these arrays, right? So I will create another method, public static void add, and I will receive an integer a and an array of integers. This is how you specify you want to receive an array of integers called AR. And what I'm going to remember, it's a new function, so it's outside of main and outside of space, but always inside of the class. Okay? And this add, what it'll do is it'll say whatever array comes over here, the people will call it like this. We'll say add and then a number and then an array. The number is going to be known as A and the array is going to be known as AR. So what I will do is I'll say for int I equals 0, I less than AR, the array that's being passed length, I plus plus, and then to each element of this array, so AR sub I will add A. I will add the integer A that was passed. So, for example, if I want to add 1 to array 1, I will do this. I will say add 1 R1. I'm calling the function add with a number and an integer array. The function add receives a number and an integer array. So it's all, I'm following suit. Now, the way arrays are updated, right? Because the elements are updated, this array will actually be updated, and you'll see the difference, right? So the array is 2, 5, 3, 7, 2. When I print it, it should be 3, 6, 3, 6, 4, 8, 3. So let's run it, any spacing. And here's my array, 3, 6, 4, 8, 3. So this method here, add, actually added an array. You can create a function to compute the average of an array. You can compute anything, right? And you can call this several times over. Now, my main program would be filled of crappy code if I were to put, for example, this routine for spacing after every time I print an array, right? And the routine to add an array over here. It's much more readable to use functions. So add 1 to array 1, that's clear. You print it, and then you space it. You can even say print an array. Let's create that method, and we'll end with that. So public static void print array, and you will pass here an integer array AR. Now the fact that this is AR does not affect this at all. These are two different ARs. They're in different methods. They don't have anything to do with each other. And the method to print an array is basically this thing that we've repeated over and over, right? It's this little for loop here. I'm copying it. Oops. I'm copying this for loop. Now, the array that I'm printing in the function will be known as AR. So this will be AR, and this will be AR. This is a routine that prints an array called AR, and AR is being passed as a parameter. So then I can call print array here, print array on array 1, remembers print array and then an integer array, which is exactly the signature of print R. It's print R and then an integer array, which will be called AR for the purpose of this snippet of code, right? So the fact that I pass array 1, it will actually pass these contents, and when these contents are passed in the function, those contents will be known as AR, not as R1 or R2. They'll just be AR. So then I'll print array 1. Here I'll print array 2, and here I will print array 3. Okay, let's compile, run, and spacing 1, and it printed array 1, array 2, and array 3, right? Now look at this code. It's very concise. Every function does just a little bit. This one prints an array, you give it the array. This one adds a number to the array. And this one prints print the string S in however many lines I specified, right? And with these three functions, I have this little tiny program. And when I say print array 1, that's a clear thing. I don't need a for loop or more code. So you've learned how to pass parameters to functions, how to create functions, and in the previous video you learned how to do global variables.